If you didn't know that it was here, you'd probably never find it. In the Eden Valley near Penrith, there is a place of work which is quite unique. And even if you did know that it was here and you knew it simply as a pottery, well, you might still go by and not realize that this place is a perfect example of living history. But look a little closer and you will see that the buildings are unusual. There are some very strange features which, like the buildings, have obviously been here for some time. And you only have to wander round to discover that Wetheriggs has nothing whatever to do with the technological revolution, at least not the one from this century. An open-air museum? Well, yes, in a way, except that this one hasn't been created just for the tourists. It's also a factory of a kind, except that if you look closely, you'll see that the pots they sell are all handmade. The shapes and colours seem to be part of a world that you might have thought had gone forever. These shapes, the decorations and the colours have little to do with design centres or the dreams of art school teachers. Wetheriggs is virtually the last of the old Victorian country potteries, and the work that comes from here is as timeless now as it was when the pottery opened in the middle of the last century. It started life as a brickworks in 1855, but within 10 years it was turning out pots for the local market. A family of potters from the northeast of England, headed by the formidable John Schofield, took over the running of Wetheriggs in the 1860s. He and his remarkable family continued to work the pottery generation after generation until well after the Second World War. They were tough people who cut and carted the clay from the big settling pans and dug it out in all weathers from the deep clay pit across the road. But the clay ran out. The price of coal to fire the kilns rose dramatically. The customers wanted plastic and Pyrex, and Wetheriggs fell slowly but surely into decay. Despite some people's efforts to keep it going, it became more and more derelict. And probably it would have died forever had it not been for the imagination and the extraordinary guts of a potter called Peter Strong. Peter had been running a pottery in Yorkshire, and to make Wetheriggs operate at all, he had to bring all his own equipment with him, and what he didn't have, he bought from a scrapyard. At this stage, they needed determination and blind faith in equal quantities, but eventually, amidst the chaos and decay, they got it working. Nowadays, the clay comes not from across the road, but from Yorkshire. Even so, handling it is just as heavy as ever it was. They break it up and feed it into something like a giant food mixer called a blunger. Here it's broken down and mixed with water. The liquid clay is filtered and fed into a small settling pan. And so to the high-pressure pump that forces the clay into a press. And if you think that this looks like a piece out of the Science Museum, let me tell you that this is one of the newer pieces of machinery that Peter Strong brought with him. It works, hour after hour, day after day. So the water is forced out. And the next day, the pressure is released, the slabs of clay drop out, and we're all ready for the last stage before the potters take over. The pressed clay is fed into a thing called a pug mill, which churns it up and forces it out like a giant square sausage. If you've ever tried to throw a pot yourself, you will know that the first problem is to get the clay to stay in the middle of the wheel. Just imagine trying to control a lump as big as this. And this is only half of it. A really big pot like this will be made in at least 2 sections and probably 3. This is the bottom of it. When the pots are finished, they're left to dry in gentle heat, either over a long horizontal chimney or in the roof above the kiln. Loading the kiln is a very skilled operation. Each pot is stacked very carefully indeed, so that the heat can build up evenly throughout the whole kiln. And like any other visitors, the local school children are welcome to come and watch. When it's finally packed, the heavy metal door is closed and screwed into place. The gas is turned on, the 4 burners are lit, and the temperature is brought carefully and steadily up and up for 24 hours to 1100 degrees. Only when the pots inside are glowing almost white hot is the gas turned off and the kiln left to cool down. Well, cool is hardly the word. It's still almost as hot as a domestic oven when they bring the pots out. Now transformed into their final state and their rich terracotta colour. But, as you've already seen, terracotta is only a part of what they make. Wetheriggs still produce the traditional glazed work that they've been making here for more than 100 years. What is so amazing to a visitor, though the potters take it quite for granted, is that every mug or bowl turns out to be exactly the same shape and size as the one before. And the speed at which they can turn them out is also quite remarkable. Just over a minute for each one. You can stand and watch it for ages. When these pots have been dried, the decoration is put on using the same method and the same tools that have been used for hundreds of years. Thin white clay piped out of a cow horn and controlled by a quill feather stuck through a small hole at the end of the horn. Look at some of the pots that Wetheriggs have in their museum, and you'll see that the patterns they use are still the same as the ones brought here from the northeast of England by John Schofield all those years ago. The dots the dashes and the wavy lines that represent the fish, the fishermen and the sea. They're still there on the pots being made today. Just this one aspect of their work shows clearly the relationship between what is going on now and what has happened here in the past. It's a way of work and a tradition which other potters are now becoming aware of. Here you'll find, if you look around, that they're trying to do a lot more than just save a tradition. They're fighting to rediscover and restore not only the Victorian machinery, but a lot more besides. Originally, the clay was hauled through this tunnel from the clay pit on the other side of the road. It was dragged up on rails through a cutting, which has been redug and is now being held in place with a traditional Cumbrian dry stone wall. For years, nature has been doing its best to hide and eventually to destroy almost everything that those old Victorians created. But this is one fight, which happily nature is losing. Originally, all the machinery here was operated by steam power through a complex system of rods, wheels, cogs and belts. Some of it is working again, and some of it is still being dug out and saved from the ravages of neglect. Nowadays, almost everything is powered by a splendid old diesel generator. But that hasn't stopped the people here from trying to restore the old mechanical systems. These rails, discovered under long grass and weeds, were originally used by the trucks that brought the clay up the cutting from across the road. Now at last they're going back. The clay pits are gone, but it won't be long before a steam-driven winch will be hauling trucks up the cutting again. The great big flat pans where the clay was left to dry all summer are overgrown and virtually derelict. Indeed, finding out what is left and what has happened over the years is a bit like an archaeological detective story. You have to know exactly what everything was for and what it all did before you can restore it.
Do we pump in the water? See what it's made of. Whoa. Obviously there's been a pump, hasn't there? A submersible pump. Pete reckons this is where they pumped it out.
It may look like an almost impossible task, but the progress that has been made is remarkable. This area has been cleared. The rubbish has gone, and in its place there is now a brand new garden centre where people who buy pots can find the plants to grow in them. Visitors, of course, are always welcome. And there are some days when a particular kind of visitor is even more welcome than usual. This is the day of the Steam and Organ Rally. Nothing to do with theme parks or Disneyland. This is the day when people come who have little interest in electronics or interactive computers. These are the people who know about boiler pressures and how an injector works. In fact, people who appreciate the finer things of life. If you think that it's really all designed for overgrown schoolboys, well, perhaps you're right. And why not? It's only once a year. For the pottery, it's an excuse to do something that they've been dreaming of for years. In the old days, the coal came right into the pottery by rail. But now, the great old kiln is never used and there's no need for coal, except today, that is. Today, they've decided to light it. The door has been blocked up with the same old bricks they used to use and covered with the old mixture of clay and ash that the potters used to seal it up with 100 years ago. There are no less than 8 fireboxes spread round the circular kiln, which used to burn 6 tons of coal just for one firing. Mark you, coal was cheap in those days.
That should go. It will.
The first time for many years that anybody has seen smoke coming out of the great old chimney. The first time that anybody here has seen the conditions that those old potters used to work in when they stoked the fires day and night. They were tough men, and they needed to be. The old blunger is a formidable and daunting machine, designed to break down the clay and mix it with water. And if they're ever going to get it to turn again, this is the day to do it. To turn it, you not only need to dig it out, you need some real power as well. And with a lot of brute force and a little luck, it should be capable of bringing the old blunger back to life. That is not a sight you'll see every day, unless you go to Wetheriggs, of course. So you might say that all this restoration of old Victorian machinery has little to do with the manufacture of handmade pots. The fact is that the two are very strongly linked together. There are pots from here in many of the great country houses, including Hampton Court. There are plants at Kew Gardens growing in pots that were made on this wheel. There are 2 weeks to go before the opening of the greatest flower show in the world at Chelsea. Here, everybody is working flat out because Wetheriggs has been allocated the rare privilege of a stand at Chelsea. And you don't get that by just being a relic of the past.